She married a poor man, not knowing he was a hidden billionaire. Imagine marrying someone, believing they're broke, only to later find out they could buy your entire street in cash. Sounds like a dream, right? Well, this isn't that kind of story. Because here, the real twist wasn't about money at all. It was about betrayal. See, Daniel wasn't the kind of man who flaunted his wealth. In fact, most people assumed he didn't have much at all. He lived simply, kept his head down, and drove the kind of car that made you wonder how it was still running. To anyone looking in, he was just another guy trying to make ends meet. But under the quiet exterior, Daniel carried a secret big enough to change everything. His wife, Sarah, didn't know. When she met him, she thought she was marrying a man with a modest job and an even more modest lifestyle. She walked into that marriage believing she was the one settling, that her love was some grand act of sacrifice. And for a while, Daniel let her believe it. Maybe that was his first mistake, because Sarah wasn't built for simplicity. At first, she smiled through the budget dinners and cozy apartment life. She told herself it was romantic. But slowly, little cracks began to appear. A sigh when a friend showed of her new designer bag. A sharp comment when Daniel skipped upgrading his phone. And eventually, the comparisons, the endless comparisons to her friends' husbands. The ones with bigger houses, shinier cars, fatter wallets. The truth, she didn't see Daniel as a partner. She saw him as a project. A man she thought she could mold into her idea of success. And when that didn't happen quickly enough, the mask slipped. The digs got nastier. The respect faded. She started treating him like the placeholder husband, someone she was stuck with until something better came along, and all the while, Daniel stayed silent. He let her underestimate him. He let her believe the story she wanted, that she was the ambitious one, and he was the dead weight. But behind the quiet smile, he was taking notes. Every word, every betrayal, every moment she chose status over love. What Sarah didn't realize, and what she was about to learn the hard way, was that Daniel's nothing wasn't really nothing at all. In fact, it was more than she could have ever imagined, because this isn't just a story about greed. It's about loyalty, and how easily it breaks when tested. It's about what happens when someone underestimates the wrong person. And most of all, it's about the price you pay when you confuse money with worth. And trust me, by the time this story is done, Sarah will know exactly how high that price really is. Oh, and before we dive in, quick pause. If you love stories where justice isn't just served, it's chilled, plated, and garnished with karma, go ahead and hit subscribe. These scripts take hours to write, edit, and recover from because second-hand rage is a real thing. So your support genuinely means the world. Now, let's start at the beginning. Daniel never stood out in a crowd, and he liked it that way. He wore plain shirts, the kind you grab off the clearance rack without a second thought. His car coughed more than it purred, and his apartment was the kind of place you pass without noticing one window always stuck, the paint on the railing peeling. He lived simply, almost invisibly. To neighbors, he was that quiet guy who worked too much. To co-workers, he was dependable but unremarkable. And to most of the world, he was just ordinary. But here's the thing, Daniel wasn't ordinary at all. Beneath the thrift store clothes and the rusty sedan, he carried a secret. A big one. He was the heir to a family business worth more than most people could dream of. His father had drilled one lesson into him from the start. Money doesn't show you who people are. It hides it, so Daniel hid his. He wanted to know who would love him without it. And then came Sarah. She was the opposite of invisible. Bright, ambitious, magnetic. The kind of woman who walked into a coffee shop and left with 3 new admirers before finishing her latte. She noticed Daniel in the quiet way people sometimes notice the one person not trying to be noticed. Their first conversation was awkward, but genuine. No rehearsed charm, no flashy lines. just Daniel asking if she wanted the seat by the window because the sun was hitting her book. She laughed, said yes, and before long, they were meeting there every week. Sarah loved that he listened, really listened. She loved that he wasn't trying to impress her with expensive dinners or over-the-top gestures. At least at first, that simplicity felt refreshing. Like a break from the noise, within a year, they were planning a wedding. Not a grand ballroom affair. No champagne towers or string quartets. Just a small gathering at a community hall, decorated with fairy lights. Daniel hung himself the night before. He handed out wildflowers he'd picked, not roses flown in from across the world. To Sarah's friends, it looked underwhelming. To Daniel, it was perfect, because every detail carried love, not money. And here's where I pause to ask you, would you date someone with nothing, as long as they made you feel loved? For Daniel, the answer had always been yes. That's why he kept his inheritance locked away, untouched. He wanted Sarah to choose him, the man who scraped together enough for rent, who made dinner with whatever was left in the fridge, who walked her home because cabs were too expensive tonight on the surface. That's exactly what she did. She said yes to the modest ring, yes to the tiny wedding, yes to the quiet man with the dented car. And Daniel, God, he believed it. He believed she was different, and for a time, maybe she was. Those early days were filled with laughter and long talks. They'd cook together, laugh over burnt pasta, stay up late planning a future that didn't depend on dollar signs. She told him she didn't care about fancy things, just love, just him. But Daniel didn't notice the way her smile lingered a little too long when she scrolled through her friends' wedding photos. He didn't notice how quickly her laugh faded when the conversation turned to new houses, new cars, new promotions. He didn't notice because he didn't want to tear him. Sarah was his proof. Proof that love could survive without wealth. Proof that he didn't need to reveal who he really was. But to Sarah, well, let's just say her definition of enough was about to change. At first, marriage felt steady. Simple dinners, quiet mornings, a life built on routine rather than extravagance. Daniel thought that was what Sarah wanted, that the little moments were enough. But slowly, the tone began to change. It started with small sighs, a long glance at her friend's Instagram post of a brand new kitchen, followed by Sarah murmuring, "Can you imagine cooking in a place like that?" She said it casually, but the words hung in the air longer than they should have. Next came the comparisons. At a dinner with her married friends, Sarah smiled too wide as one of them bragged about her husband's promotion. Then, on the drive home, her smile faded into a sharp question. Don't you ever want more, Daniel? A bigger house? A real car? Something better? He shrugged, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. I'm happy with what we have. But Sarah wasn't. Over time, the little remarks turned into barbs. You're too comfortable. Don't you care about getting ahead? Other men are building futures. You're just standing still. She'd say it with a laugh, a brush of her hand, as if it was a joke. But the edge in her voice told him it wasn't, and while she dismissed him to his face, what she said behind his back was worse. Daniel overheard one night voices drifting from the kitchen while she was on the phone with a friend. I'm married beneath me. He's sweet, but God, he has no ambition. I feel stuck. Sometimes I wonder if I made a mistake. Those words cut deeper than she'd ever know. But Daniel didn't storm in. He didn't confront her. He just stood there in the dark hallway, listening, memorizing every syllable. He knew people showed their true colors when they thought no one was watching. And Sarah was painting a very clear picture. From then on, he noticed more. The way her compliments disappeared. The way her gaze lingered when other men in suits walked by. The way she adjusted her posture, her smile, whenever a wealthy neighbor stopped to chat. The woman who once laughed with him over burnt pasta now rolled her eyes when he cooked. The woman who once said love mattered more than money now wanted proof that money mattered too. And Daniel, he stayed silent. He watched, He catalogued every smirk, every insult, every comparison. He let her dig herself deeper because sometimes silence is sharper than confrontation, but don't mistake his quiet for ignorance. Daniel wasn't blind. He wasn't weak. He was patient because the truth, the real, staggering truth, was still locked away. And Sarah had no idea she was building her disdain on top of a lie she would regret believing. Before we move on, let me ask you something. If your partner constantly compared you to richer couples, would you stay or would you leave? Daniel chose to stay, at least for now, but not because he was naive. No, he was waiting for the moment when Sarah's words and actions finally collided with reality. And trust me, that collision was coming. The breaking point didn't come in private. It never does with people like Sarah. No, it came under the warm glow of a chandelier, surrounded by laughter, wine glasses, and people who thought they knew what a happy marriage looked like. Daniel and Sarah had been invited to dinner by one of her old college friends, wealthy, successful, and all too eager to showcase it. The table was long, the food extravagant, the conversations dripping with subtle one-upmanship. Daniel sat quietly listening. He wasn't uncomfortable. He'd grown up in rooms like this. But Sarah, she thrived here. She leaned forward, laughed a little too loudly, tried too hard to show she belonged. And then it happened. One of the husbands made a passing comment about upgrading his car. Something sleek and new. Everyone chuckled, trading stories about horsepower and leather interiors. And Sarah seized her moment. She gestured toward Daniel with a smirk. Well, I wouldn't know much about new cars. My husband's still driving that. What is it, honey? That tin can that barely runs. The table erupted in polite laughter. Daniel forced a smile, though his chest burned. Sarah wasn't done, you know. Sometimes I joke that the car has more character than he does. At least it breaks down less often. More laughter. Too loud, too long. Daniel caught the eyes of a few guests shifting awkwardly, realizing this wasn't just a joke. It was a jab, a very public one. He stayed composed. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't fire back. He lifted his glass, sipped slowly, and let the silence swallow the table when the laughter finally died. Because here's the thing. Daniel could have bought every car at that table. Twice. He could have bought the entire restaurant they were sitting in. But that wasn't the point anymore. This wasn't about money. It was about respect, or in Sarah's case, the lack of it. She didn't just mock his car. She mocked him, who he was, what he stood for. She turned their marriage into entertainment. And sitting there, under that chandelier, Daniel felt something shift. It was small, almost imperceptible, like a thread snapping in the back of his mind. For months he had endured the comparisons, the sighs, the whispered insults behind closed doors. But now she was bold enough to humiliate him in front of strangers. That told him everything he needed to know. She didn't just want more money. She wanted a different man, and Daniel knew, in that quiet, burning moment, that she was about to get exactly what she deserved. But not yet. Not here. Because patience, when sharpened, is more dangerous than rage. Before we move on, let me ask you this. If your spouse belittled you in public, what would you do right then and there? Because Daniel, he chose silence. But don't mistake silence for surrender. Sometimes silence is just the calm before the storm. After the dinner, Daniel didn't storm out. He didn't argue with Sarah or beg for her respect. No, he went quiet. And in that silence, a plan began to take shape, because Daniel wasn't interested in trading insults or proving himself with quick, flashy purchases. He wanted something colder, smarter, a long game that would make the truth undeniable. He wanted Sarah to choke on her own assumptions.so while she scrolled through Instagram, comparing their life to glossy pictures of luxury couples. Daniel went back to work. Not the day job she believed barely kept them afloat, but the empire he'd been quietly building for years. Every morning, he slipped out of the house, coffee in hand, dressed like a man heading to another average office. Sarah never asked questions. Why would she? In her mind, he wasn't ambitious enough to surprise her. But those mornings were anything but ordinary. Daniel was in meetings with CEOs, discussing acquisitions worth millions. He toured properties in discreet black cars, eyeing buildings he'd later buy outright. He signed contracts with banks that bent over backward to keep him happy. And all the while, Sarah thought he was just another man trapped in a dead-end routine. The contrast was almost comical. One afternoon, she called him in the middle of a negotiation. He stepped out, phone pressed to his ear. "Daniel, do you think we could maybe, I don't know, try harder to upgrade our lifestyle? I saw this villa online, and other couples are." He cut her off gently. "I'll look into it." And he meant it. Just not in the way she thought, because Daniel wasn't planning on renting a villa. He was planning on buying 3, quietly, in cash, over the next few months. He expanded everything: investments, holdings, connections. He donated to charities under aliases, ensuring headlines would soon paint him as the mysterious benefactor everyone wanted to know. He networked at galas Sarah never even heard about, shaking hands with people who could shift markets with a phone call. But here's the part that stuck him the most. He came home every night, carrying the weight of deals that could change cities, and Sarah barely looked up from her phone. She just sighed, muttered something about being tired, and asked why he hadn't thought of applying for a better job. It was almost poetic. Her blindness gave him cover. Every dismissive comment, every side eye when he pulled up in his Tinker car, it only fueled him further. He didn't need her approval. He was building something so much bigger than her shallow imagination could ever grasp, and he waited, patiently. Because the unveiling had to be perfect, he timed it around their anniversary. When Sarah insisted they celebrate with her friends, the same circle who'd laughed at his expense, she wanted to book a trendy rooftop restaurant. Daniel agreed, smiled even. But what Sarah didn't know was that the rooftop already belonged to him. He had closed on the entire building 2 weeks earlier, quietly, without fanfare. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It wasn't about buying a car just to shut her up. Daniel wanted the truth to hit her like a tidal wave. No escape, no denial. He rehearsed it in his head, not the reveal itself, but the look on her face when she realized everything she'd mocked him for was a lie. And here's what fascinates me. Daniel could have told her from the start. He could have been upfront the day they met, introduced himself as the man with more wealth than her wildest dreams. But he didn't. He wanted love stripped of status, stripped of money. He wanted to know who Sarah was when the glitter was gone. Now he knew. She wasn't just disappointed in his supposed lack of ambition. She was disgusted by it. And that disgust made her careless. Cruel-Dotless O'Daniel kept stacking the deck, buying properties, expanding companies, setting up trust funds that reporters would soon uncover. He made sure that when the curtain finally lifted, it wouldn't just be Sarah who realized the truth, it would be everyone. And here's the kicker. He never once slipped. Not a single clue. He drove the same car, wore the same watch, came home with the same quiet smile. Sarah thought she was married to mediocrity. But what she was really married to was a billionaire sharpening his blade. And before I move forward, let me throw this to you. Would you keep your wealth hidden from your partner, or be upfront from the start? Because Daniel, he chose to hide it. And that choice is about to make the next chapter unforgettable. For a while, Sarah stayed content with her narrative. She had married a man who just didn't try hard enough. But cracks began to show, not in Daniel's life, but in the lies she told herself. It started small. One morning, while tidying the drawer where Daniel kept his boring work papers, Sarah stumbled across a leather folder. Inside, she found documents, shares in companies she'd actually heard of, real estate contracts with numbers that didn't even make sense to her. 6 zeros. 7 zeros. She laughed, shaking her head. No way, she muttered. This has to be fake. Or maybe he's holding them for someone else. She stuffed the folder back, convincing herself she was right, because believing the truth meant admitting she'd been wrong all along. But the universe didn't stop their daughter to a family friend's barbecue. Someone casually mentioned seeing Daniel at a downtown hotel one that only hosted big corporate events. I didn't know you were in with those guys, the friend chuckled. Sarah froze, smiling politely, but her eyes narrowed. When she pressed Daniel later, he just shrugged. Just helping out where I can. His tone was so calm, so casual. It almost infuriated her. And that's when the paranoia set in. She started watching him closer. Who he texted. When he came home. If his clothes smelled faintly of cigars after late-night meetings. The more she noticed, the less it added up. And instead of softening her, it twisted her. Because if Daniel was wealthier than he let on, why wasn't he giving it to her? Why wasn't he making her life easier? Showering her with the things she deserved? So she pushed. Hard. Daniel, I'm serious. This apartment is depressing. Everyone else has upgraded. We're falling behind. He glanced up from his book. Behind who? Behind everyone. She snapped. You don't care how this makes me look? That word look. It told Daniel everything. She wasn't asking for comfort. She was asking for status. But he didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. Instead, he leaned back, let out a breath, and said, I'll see what I can do. And with those 7 words, Sarah took the bait. Her spending grew reckless. Designer clothes on credit cards. Spa weekends with the girls. Subtle digs at Daniel about how she carried their social image. When in reality, he was the only reason the bills got paid. Daniel watched it all unfold, never flinching, because every careless swipe of her card was another shovel of dirt in the hole she was digging for herself. Dinners. She bragged about future plans, vacations Daniel hadn't agreed to, renovations he'd never mentioned. He sat quietly, sipping his wine, letting her fantasy build higher and higher, knowing it would all come crashing down. And here's the part that chilled me most. Sarah wasn't just greedy. She was blind. Friends began dropping hints. Your husband's really connected, isn't he? One asked at brunch. Sarah forced a laugh, brushing it off. But that night, she confronted Daniel again. Why are people saying that? What are you hiding from me? He met her stare, calm as ever. Maybe they're just mistaken. She hated that answer. The stillness of it. So she doubled down. Spend more. Demanded more. Convinced herself that if Daniel had anything, he was being cruel by not giving it to her. What she didn't realize was that Daniel was watching her reveal herself piece by piece, and the man she thought she could belittle into ambition. He was quietly setting the stage for the grandest reveal she'd ever witnessed. Quick poll for you. Do you think Sarah deserves to know the truth or to be shocked by it? Because trust me, the mask is about to come off. And when it does, it won't just slip, it'll shatter. The night it all came crashing down wasn't loud. No shouting, no slammed doors, just velvet lights, crystal glasses, and the faint hum of a string quartet. Sarah thought it was another one of those dull charity galas she'd dragged Daniel to, events where she pretended they belonged. While quietly resenting that he didn't measure up, she wore a new gown, bought on credit, of course. He wore the same old tailored suit she always complained about. But what she didn't know was that this night was his stage. Halfway through the evening, the host took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, please join me in thanking one of tonight's primary sponsors, Daniel Whitmore. Sarah blinked. The name rang in her ears. Sponsors? Then the room erupted in applause. Heads turned, smiles lit up. And suddenly, Daniel wasn't the quiet man in the corner anymore. He was the center of it all. Sarah's hand gripped his arm. Daniel, what is this? She whispered, her voice sharp. He just smiled politely, walking toward the podium, The speeches were brief, direct. He didn't brag, didn't gloat. He simply spoke with the quiet confidence of a man who no longer had anything to hide. About investments in education, rebuilding neighborhoods, and continuing his family's legacy. Words Sarah had never heard leave his lips. Stop why the time he returned to their table. Her face was pale. She leaned in, her voice trembling now. "You're rich." Daniel looked at her. Really looked. Then he set his glass down with the softest clink. "I didn't hide it to punish you," he said. "I hid it because I wanted someone who loved me without the money. And now," his eyes lingered on her, unblinking. "Now I know." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The truth had landed, and there was no way to spin it, no clever excuse. Around them, the music played on. Laughter and chatter filled the room. But at their table, there was only stillness. And here's the thing, sometimes silence after the truth lands is louder than any argument. She sat frozen, realizing she hadn't just underestimated him. She had revealed herself, piece by piece, until there was nothing left for him to wonder about. Daniel didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to humiliate her in return. The reveal was enough, because in that single moment, the entire balance of their marriage shifted. She was no longer the woman married to a broke man. She was the wife who mocked, belittled, and betrayed a billionaire without even knowing it. And that was a reality she could never escape. When the truth finally shattered the illusion, Sarah couldn't hide behind her smirk anymore. The friends she once used to compare Daniel against, they saw her now clearly, not as the polished, witty wife with high standards, but as the woman who mocked her husband for being cheap, only to discover he could buy their mansions outright. The humiliation spread quietly at first. A few whispers, a few awkward smiles when her name came up, but whispers become currents, and currents become waves. Soon, everyone knew. Sarah had spent years complaining about a man she never truly understood. At home, the silence was different, heavy. No sarcastic remarks, no jabs at his car or clothes, just silence. Sarah tried to repair it in little ways, cooking dinner, leaving notes, pressing his hand when no one was looking. But Daniel didn't bite. One evening, she finally broke. "Daniel, I was wrong. I should have trusted you, respected you. I love you." He looked at her, eyes calm but distant. "Respect," he said softly, "isn't something you can glue back together once it's been shattered. Love without respect is just performance." And that was the moment Sarah realized. He wasn't angry. He was finished. Daniel didn't rush into divorce. He didn't slam doors or deliver ultimatums. He simply stepped back from the wreckage. His focus shifted not on fixing what was broken, but on building something new. He poured himself into philanthropy, schools in neighborhoods that had been forgotten, programs for families trying to climb out of poverty, investments that weren't about profit, but about purpose. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt free. No mask, no hiding, just himself, living with intention. Meanwhile, Sarah watched from the sidelines. The man she dismissed as unambitious was out there shaping lives, commanding respect in circles she could only dream of entering. And the cruelest part, he did it all with grace, never once mentioning her name. Because Daniel understood something most people don't. Revenge doesn't always come wrapped in fire and fury. Sometimes, it's as quiet as living well while the person who underestimated you drowns in their own regret. By the time the dust settled, Daniel had something far more valuable than money: clarity. He knew who he was. He knew what he stood for. And he knew, without question, that the only relationships worth keeping are the ones built on respect. So if there's a takeaway here, it's this. Real wealth isn't in the bank. It isn't in the car, the house, or the gala invitations. Real wealth is in knowing who truly values you without conditions, without comparisons, without the mask of money. And Daniel, He finally understood he'd been rich in the one way Sarah could never be, and that was the end of it. Daniel walked away with his dignity intact, his life sharper and lighter than ever. Sarah, she was left with the mess she created, the whispers, the humiliation, the gnawing awareness that she had thrown away the very thing she claimed she wanted. Her fart crumbled the moment the truth came out. No amount of expensive dresses or practiced smiles could erase the fact that she'd mocked the man who could have given her the world, and more importantly, chose not to, because she hadn't earned it. Daniel didn't need revenge in the traditional sense. His justice was quieter, but far more devastating. He lived well. He built, he gave, he grew. And Sarah, she lived in the shadow of her own greed. If there's one takeaway here, it's simple. Underestimate someone because of appearances, and you just might lose everything. Respect is worth more than status. Dignity lasts longer than diamonds. And the truth, well, the truth always shows up, sooner or later. Hey, if you found this story as satisfying as I did, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe. These scripts take hours to craft, and your support keeps this channel alive. Until next time, remember, never judge someone by their wallet, because the truth might just bankrupt you.